This is The State of Things from the American Tobacco Historic District. I'm Frank STASIO. The 1980s. The clothes were brighter, the hair was bigger, and the music was revolutionary. Oh, wait a minute. Revolutionary? Look, this is a decade remembered for unremarkable synth-heavy music performed by gimmicky artists. We mean revolutionary. Well, now, the truth is, in some circles, a revolution was happening. In big music cities like New York, the punk rock subculture of the 1970s was giving way to a new wave sound, rebellious rock influenced by power pop. Bands adopted a do-it-yourself attitude, and the sound spread rapidly at the grassroots level to other trendy cities like Los Angeles, Austin, and Raleigh. Raleigh, North Carolina, home to some legendary musicians, thriving music scene that exists today. But in the 1980s, not many people would consider the Triangle a fitting home for an emerging sound. But Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill not only provided a place for punk to evolve, Tar Heel bands turned out to be some of the era's most influential acts. The Sponge Tones, the Fabulous Knobs, Arrogance, and others have been acknowledged by contemporary bands like Hootie and the Blowfish for providing a foundation for their sound. I mean, here's Hootie's lead singer, Darius Rucker.
Growing up and playing music in the Carolinas, the bands like the DBs, the bands like the Sponge Tones, Don Dixon, they had a following. They could go play these big clubs and they had these great followings, and so you just thought, they did that everywhere. We didn't know they were just, regional guys, and, you open up for the Sponge Tones and, then you watch them and you go, wow, we're not worthy to be a band.
There we go. In the 1980s, native music producer Mitch Easter dubbed North Carolina's punk music scene Comboland. And if you are part of Comboland as a musician or a fan, there is no doubt you will remember it fondly. Filmmaker Steve Boyle does. He's a television producer and a writer whose latest project is a labor of love called Return to Comboland. It's a film and production that includes Steve's personal recollections, collection of footage, interviews, and, of course, the music from the heyday of Comboland. And plenty of big hair to go around. Steve Boyle is my guest this hour on The State of Things. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You made our producer, Lindsay Thomas, the happiest woman on earth, because she is Madam 80s.
Oh, well, then this is the right project for her.
It is. That's why we had a 5.5-minute intro. It all came...
and it's all correct. It's all amazing, too.
Well, and it is cool stuff, and it's stuff that we really do need to talk about. Let's talk about Comboland first. What does it mean?
Well, Comboland is, I guess, a term for an era of music that was coming out of the North Carolina area. I'm handling a specific part of that era from 1981 to 1984, mainly because I documented the scene around that time, and I have a lot of footage from that time.
Well, talk about the evolution, because it is, and I think it deserves this much attention and description. But tell us about the evolution of the music. Where does it come from, and what is it reacting to?
Well, it depends how far back you want to go. I mean, the main influence really, I guess, would come out of the Beatles and the British Invasion, and to some extent the Rolling Stones. Comboland being a pun, I guess, to some degree on the fact that the Beatles were a combo. But like a lot of people in this country, come February 1964, the Beatles land. They go in New York. They wind up on Ed Sullivan. And everyone's attached to their TV and involved in this. Specifically, kids, a group out of all things Winston-Salem, because you've got Mitch Easter and Chris Stamey and Don Dixon and these guys who all wind up in high school bands and start with a lot of other people in America doing that. As time goes on into the 70s, New York punk scene evolves. I was lucky enough to get involved in that between 1975 and 1978. That segues into the glitter scene, the post-glitter scene in London, with the Ramones playing in London. The Sex Pistols evolve. That winds up with punk and new wave and comes back to the U.S., and this do-it-yourself attitude spreads throughout the U.S., in particular in Raleigh. So when I leave New York in 1978, and I come to Raleigh to work for WRAL-TV, there's a music scene starting up. And my attitude was, oh, yeah, of course. I just came from a music scene. Every city's got a music scene, not realizing That's not the case.
Well, let's talk about that and get a sample of it first. Certainly a lot of Beatles influence. I mean, there was a thing called rock and roll, and we all knew what it sounded like in the 60s. And as you say, it starts to branch a little bit. But the Beatles' influence certainly can be heard in bands like the Sponge Tones, one of the Combolands that you feature. Let's listen to this. This is called She Goes Out With Everybody from 1983, the Sponge Tones. Yeah, the Beatles, Herman's Hermits, and yet there's something authentic about this and something new happening too.
And in that particular album, if you go out there and find it, the CD is out, buy it, because when I hear that CD, it's called, I think it's called, Beat and Torn, I think is the CD now. But I still get up and jump up and down. It's beautifully produced. George Martin and Jeff Emmerich could not have produced a better album. So they did a great job on that particular album. I mean, their other albums are great too, but that one in particular is very, very Beatle-oriented. It still stands the test of time.
Is this music a kind of reaction to the sort of the glitz and the drama that was one of the branches of rock? It seemed like rock artists in the 70s weren't satisfied with the music. They had to somehow dress up and slaughter chickens and do other things to get away from the music? Not that?
There's all sorts of stuff in there. You can't say one thing was happening at one time, because if you look at the Ramones in New York, then they're, 4 chords, no waiting, a minute and a half for a song, beat on the brat with a baseball bat, but then you still have remnants of glitter and hair and makeup and a flock of seagulls and all these types. They were all coming out around the same time. So there was a lot of different attitudes, but the main attitude for everybody was we don't have to wait for the large corporations, these big record companies to come in, and we can do it ourselves.
Why so big here in the Triangle?
I'm still trying to figure that one out. The best I can figure is to relate it something to do with weather. You can get a perfect storm occasionally for music scenes, and that happens through time. San Francisco had it in 1967 with psychedelia, and certainly Liverpool in 64, Hamburg in 61. In Philadelphia with doo-wop and that. And Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill seemed to do that too. When I first came here in September 78, I was horrified to discover there was no drinking in this county. It was a dry state. And so liquor by the drink was being voted on. And Bob DeBartoleben, the weather guy at Channel 5, was saying he'll buy drinks for everyone in the crew if it winds up passing the law. And certainly by November, we were all drinking at a local bar because it had passed. And between liquor by the drink and the drinking age being 18 at the time, and the fact that the area is surrounded by all the colleges and universities, it fueled the club scene. And the club scene, of course, needed bands, and the bands were being influenced by the punk scene out of New York and the DIY attitude. So you wind up with this lovely, perfect storm of everyone wanting to create. Add additionally to that, North Carolina as a state was really pushing the arts. If you could sculpt right, do anything, the state was there to really, really push hard for it, more so than it is now. Certainly the area is still artistic, but it was an amazing thing then. So add all these things to it, and it was a wonderful scene. One of the clips I did that I put online, Dick Hodgins talks about showing up from South Carolina to go to the pier. Their band was playing warm-up to Arrogance, and they show up to the pier, and there were 300 people, he says, waiting at the door to get in. And that's no exaggeration. I happened to be in that show, and that's exactly what it was like. To have 300 people show up before the doors open for anybody is an amazing thing these days.
Well, what do you think it was? Do you think there was an extraordinary amount of talent in North Carolina? Was it just pent-up demand, people just waiting for the bars to open so they could go perform?
I think it's all the above. The universities bred a lot of this. All these bands, or most of these bands, came out of the colleges and universities. And yes, 18-year-olds going out and partying. I mean, once the laws changed again in April of 1984, the federal government came in, and Mothers Against Drunk Drivers and all that lobbied to change it to 21-year-olds for drinking. And at that point, all the club scenes and that dried up, because all the drinking wound up being sequestered to dorm rooms. And
you said that a lot of folks from New York and Los Angeles came to this area, and they were as surprised as you were to find out what kind of a scene there was here.
Yeah. We also realized back then, the internet wasn't happening. Right. If you're lucky, FedEx was working. So communications weren't that brilliant So, yeah, when you showed up here and you found out what was going on, it was a bit of a surprise. Back then, Raleigh was considered a flyover. So record company people would go, well, I go to Atlanta and I go to New York and I fly over Raleigh. Why should I drop in? I mean, that's not the case now. So it was tough for the artists back then to get noticed. They would have to chase to New York and play CBGBs or whatever, which a lot of them did. But by the time they got there to do that, it was getting the recognition was tougher to do.
And there were people, you were among those, shooting videos at the time, but you were the first one, I think, to shoot the Fabulous Knobs?
Yeah, I was originally in a punk band in New York between 75 and 78, and my parents are British, so I used to watch UK television with Ready, Steady, Go and Jukebox Jury and that. When a band couldn't show up, they brought a film clip. And this is in the mid-'60s. And so I remembered that, and I was working for Viacom, my first job in New York, with Tony Madejczyk being my buddy and pal. I met him back then, for those of you who remember Tony from the Spectator Magazine. And I thought, well, I'm going to do a film, or I'm going to do a video of my band in 1977. And the only outlet for it was, strangely enough, Max's Kansas City played it at the bar. And they had just gotten a 3/4 videotape machine, and they said, oh, great, because we just got this video from Andy Warhol and this other video from the New York Dolls, and we'll put yours in there. And I was like, oh, great. That's me and the New York Dolls and Andy Warhol and nobody else for a while until... But there was nothing else to play. Nobody had stuff.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to keep that going, and when I got here and saw the scene, I started to ingratiate myself with these bands and talking them into doing music videos, even though there was really no outlet for it.
I'm glad you did, because it's a great record, and we're going to continue the conversation this hour with Steve Boyle, the man behind the upcoming film Return to Comboland, a documentary project that explores North Carolina's music scene in the early 1980s. And just ahead, two former 80s rockers join the conversation on the State of Things from North Carolina Public Radio, broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Stay with us. This is The State of Things, broadcasting from the American Tobacco Historic District. I'm Frank Stasio. My guest this hour is Steve Boyle. He's a filmmaker behind the upcoming documentary called Return to Comboland. The project recalls a time in North Carolina's music history when punk rock reigned supreme, the talented Tar Heel bands were making waves, along with the new wave sound of the 1980s. One of the bands was the Fabulous Knobs, a fashion-forward group of misfits with a sultry lead singer. Let's have a listen to their tune, Don't Stop, from 1982. Joining the program now are Dave Adams and Terry Anderson. Dave and Terry were former bandmates in the Fabulous Knobs during the heyday of Comboland, that term used to describe North Carolina's punk music scene, the DIY scene here in the Tar Heel State. Terry and Dave, welcome to State of Things.
Hello, how are you doing?
Thanks, Frank. It's great to be here.
It is good to have you here. We've established how popular this music was and talked a bit about why. Terry, describe for us the scene. What was it like performing that kind of music in the 80s in North Carolina?
It was pretty wild. I mean, we started out in college together about 1978. And then we started hanging out at clubs that we were playing at. And then we would run into opening acts. And some of them would be like nice, perfect music. And the next thing, we'd play with punk bands. And so it was a real cauldron of a lot of different things. Great songs, usually, and just a lot of fun and wild nights.
Dave, I've been alternately calling this indie and DIY and punk. Is this punk or is this some? I mean, I know it doesn't matter in the long run, but where does it fit in?
I think it's more like roots rock.
Yeah.
I think it has elements of punk to it. But the Knobs always had a rebellious kind of thing going on, and I thought that was really attractive about them. I come from a pop background, so it's like I was also attracted to the fact that they were also kind of pop also.
What did you think you were doing at the time? Because we can look back now, we can reflect, relabel, and do whatever the heck we want. It's my show. Actually, this is Lindsay's show. But when at the time, what did you feel like you were doing?
I felt like it was, when I was playing with the Knobs, it was just a really roots rock, basic rock and roll band with a punk spirit, I thought.
It was pretty much a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Sometimes we wanted to be the... NRBQ, and sometimes we wanted to be Smokey Robinson, or sometimes we wanted to be Sex Pistols,
And sometimes you guys are doing stand-up comedy.
Oh, a lot of times we did a lot of plays.
That's right. I remember
lay down comedy. Right? You had a play. Describe the play.
Oh, man.
It's ridiculous.
Well, one of the plays, we had David, he was laying down like he had a rough night, and he was laying there trying to get some sleep, and so somebody else would be acting like they were pushing a lawnmower. And then someone else would be the window. And so the punchline of we'd have different scenarios, but the punchline was always go to HE double hockey sticks, okay? And so he would jump up and go to the person that was the window and stick his head out the window, who was, and that's what he would say.
His hands up like a mime.
Right.
Club owners didn't like this.
We got threatened a couple of times.
Oh, I think they find it very entertaining.
Yeah, deep down inside. Now, you talked about Dave. Do you mean Dave Adams, or you're talking about the late lead singer now?
David Enlow.
David Enlow.
Right. He just passed away back in November. So we miss him a lot. He was a great songwriter, great guitar player, really underrated guitar player.
Yeah, I hear you comparing him often to Keith Richards in your description of his style. Is that something he consciously imitated?
I think so. Yeah, that's where he was the first time I met him, and from his last day, that's really where he was at, where his head was at, and he really played a lot of solos. Like Mick Taylor, his fluidity of his solos were just beautiful.
And Steve, you mentioned the fact that one of the reasons you got into this was you were trying to do documentation of films that where the guys are still around.
Yeah, I was working on another project, still working on it with 60s rockers, and the problem was, and still is, they keep dying on me. Every time I think I've got an appointment with somebody, if they're having stroked out, they're dying. And I thought, well, I work with everybody now because we all look good. We're all about 50, and we all most everybody sounds good. A lot of the people are still playing. And I no sooner start this, and then Dave starts getting ill and then dies. So it sort of proved the point. I better document it now while we're still looking and sounding good.
You talked about Dave Enlow sounding like Keith Richards. There was Deborah DeMilo, too, your lead singer, who with the Fabulous Knobs. Tell me a little bit about her, because when I listen to her, I'm hearing Grace Slick plus. Right? I mean, she could sing.
She was a lot of things. She was she really loved Etta James, and she wanted to be more of a bluesy singer, I think, And I always struggled, and everybody else always struggled in the band with, well, what is the draw here? Is it the songs or is it Deborah? And it seemed to me to be 50-50.
Yeah, I think it was both of them. It was she definitely had a lot of stage presence. And still does, but I think it was those two things: her stage presence and the band had lots of personality. Also, I thought
we picked a lot of great songs, and we also wrote a lot of great songs for her.
Yeah, Dave did a lot of the Dave Enlow did a lot
David
of the songwriting,
and
right? And you wrote a lot of the songs. Well, talk about that a little bit, Steve. And maybe you can be the one to tell me more about that. Here's a DIY band that's into the music. Let's just make music. Let's get around all this, the business end of it. And yet there's a great theatricality and stage presence, charisma that these bands have.
Oh yeah,
This one.
those people that stood online for a reason. It wasn't just the music; it was the show, and it was the people that were on stage. I mean, they had a hardcore following. A lot of these bands did.
So what happens now? You talked about the drinking age. It starts out at 18 when finally the state, allows drinking, and then it gets raised to 21. Does that end the movement? What happens?
It evolves, I would say. It kind of ends an era. By coincidence or on purpose or what, but it happens around 83, 84. All these bands, the Knobs and all the Arrogance and that, all start breaking up. And for that matter, by the summer of 84, even I leave. I break up, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm even
But
gone.
you're back together
But
now.
I'm back.
You're
I
on
feel
the show.
so much better, thank
Good.
you. So, but these things evolve anyway. It's the nature of things. There was
The
also
state of things.
Thank you very much. It's good to be corrected and plugged. But now, the other thing that was going on at the time that I found amazing was everyone played nice together. Now, I did not see that in New York. I mean, I would literally see knife fights out in front of CBGBs with other big bands fighting each other. No kidding. So, but everybody liked each other pretty much here and played well together. When I did the video, Please You No More for the Knobs, after it's done, keyboard player Dave Adams comes up to me and says, "Oh, I got a band. We might need a video too." And it winds up, I'm like, "Really? You're in another band? Well, what are you doing in this band? What's going on?" And so it winds up being Glass Moon and On a Carousel, which winds up being a top 40 hit.
Well, Dave Adams, tell me a little bit about that, about breaking up. How much of that had to do with the audience, losing some of your audience to the new liquor laws, and how much was just evolution, getting older, moving on?
I guess so. I wasn't really aware of it that much. I mean, I don't remember that it was a really big deal.
Terry?
Well, I think we broke up for band reasons more than that thing. Deborah wanted to do a solo thing, and we became the Woods, and we actually had some good success with that on Twin Tone Records, and so it all kind of worked out for us, kind of.
Steve, tell us about some of the other Comboland bands. What about the DBs? One of the vocalists in that band was local record producer Chris Stamey.
Well, no. Oh, yeah. Chris is and still doing well in Durham, I guess.
Yeah.
And the DBs were an odd one for the rest of the bands that were coming out, at least the ones that I'm featuring, because Chris wound up in New York, brought his Winston-Salem friends along with him, and had some success in New York, actually just as I was leaving New York. This is in the mid to late 70s. And could not get a major label deal in the U.S., but does get a label deal in the U.K., or do get a label deal in the U.K., and become a real phenomenon with other upcoming artists. So you do get people like Hootie and the Blowfish and that are radically influenced by the DBs. And they are very Beatle influenced as well. So they've got the new waves. In fact, Chris Stamey and Peter Hulsapple and Mitch Easter and Don Dixon are really credited with the Comboland sound and what would wind up being jangle pop, starting with REM.
Well, let's listen a little bit to the DBs and get a sense of what it is you're talking about. This is a live performance in 1981. DB's Judy, 1981. Steve, what do you remember about that performance?
I remember being in the back of the pier, shooting that thing with a mic on the camera, and hoping not to get bumped by everybody because it was a full house, and thought they were phenomenal. I had already bought the album that had just come out. They were talking about Repercussions, which was their second album, and the fun thing about that particular shoot is shortly after that, Chris Stamey leaves the band. So that footage seems to be rare footage of them. It's the only footage of them live in a club with that lineup.
We hear so much about artists who have influenced others. Talk about Hootie and the Blowfish. Certainly we know Mitch Easter's important role with REM, changing their sound in a lot of ways and helping them get to the top. What's the difference between the bands like yours, like the Fabulous Knobs, that have a great sound clearly, but simply don't get the contracts and the recognition? What's the difference?
Well, for us, we were pretty offensive. So we were not marketable to radio. I mean, they played certain songs on the radio, on rock radio, back when there was rock radio. They played certain songs of ours that were okay, palatable to the public, but there was a lot of other stuff that, especially live, that they couldn't put out in front of people.
Yeah, I mean, radio, has become so, specialized now. It's like you have to fit into a certain category or they won't play your record. And it wasn't until like the 80s that really started to, you had to fit into a certain category before you could get played. And the Fabulous Knobs were so unique that they would play, there would be rock and then there would be a little bit of soul and there would be a little bit of punk, and it was like, it was hard to put them into a category.
Despite the fact that we had hits,
Yeah, but there were hits. I mean,
hits.
there were really hits. I mean, I felt that all along.
But and realize also the record companies, and they still do this to this day, it's whatever's popular for that minute is what they chase after. And if you don't fit in within that little cookie cutter hole, they aren't interested in you. And so they'll miss up on other artists that are blatant hits. And that's not unusual to this day.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like you're in that awful twilight when the music is evolving and emerging, but you don't have the internet yet to get your own, cultivate your own niche audience.
I mean, they have that's a big advantage today that the bands have, is that they have, they can be exposed on the internet and the mass media. I mean, I believe if the Knobs had ever been on mass media, they would have definitely, had some deals going on.
I think so, especially YouTube.
Yeah.
We'd have had you on this show in the 80s. If I'd have been here, Lindsay would have been about 8 years old. And
Well, thanks a lot, Frank.
I was somewhere.
You're a little late, buddy.
It was the 80s. I wasn't listening to music. I was reading the papers and crying in the 1980s, if you remember
still do that.
what was going on in the front pages. But you talked about the audiences here, and yet overseas. You talked about Chris Stamey being a hit in the UK. Don Dixon went to #1 in Sweden.
Yeah, with that was, I think, in 84, 85 with Praying Mantis.
I did that tour.
You did that tour?
That's
Well, tell us all about it.
Before you do, let's listen to some of it.
Okay.
She had insect eyes, but I could still see that the look she gave him, your guilt to me. I feel like a praying mantis, a century. I feel like a praying mantis, a century. It's like can't help it, I've been too frantic too long.
Don Dixon of Arrogance, Praying Mantis, Insect Eyes. Can't play that on the radio.
No, but it's got a hook the size of Cincinnati in that song. It's a great song.
a great song.
I think there's some
offensive about
underlying.
it.
There's some underlying meaning to that song.
Underlying. Puff the Magic Dragon, that was a big dope song, right?
That's right.
I never knew that.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about the
Yeah, Don took me, the first time I ever went to Europe, Don took me over there, and he says, here, listen to this record, and we're going to play it when we get there. And hardly any kind of rehearsal or anything, so he plops us out on stage, and I look out, there's 18,000 people in Leuven, Belgium, at this huge festival. And I'm like, what has he done to me? And so, but after that, we had great shows. It was packed with, there's this place called the Paradiso that's still there in Amsterdam that was absolutely packed. It was one of the greatest shows I've ever played in my life. It was 3 encores, and they still were tearing the house down. And that place holds probably, what do you think, like 2,000, something like that?
Yeah, probably.
And what's the story there? Why is it so much easier to get an audience? And that's been true.
I have no idea. I still play Europe with my other band, the Yahoos, and we played Spain last February, and every show was completely sold out, packed. And they still get rock and roll over there.
It's a grass is greener, I think, thing. We like a lot of overseas bands, and then overseas like American bands. It's been like that forever. I mean, Hendrix that's a classic story of him being a hit in the UK, and that he stuck playing warm up to the Monkees in the US.
And I think we all thought that Hootie and the Blowfish was a Swedish band. Cutie. Could have been that. You know, there was what happened to the music, I think, in that era. If you take Gloria and you take that as the kind of the silliest rock song ever, but emblematic back in the 60s, the original, right? 3 chords, and that's all it is. And then you hear what Patti Smith does to that thing. It becomes a work of art. But because you knew it was the silliest rock song ever, I mean, that had to be part of that.
Well, my son last night, I went to a Mudcats game last night, and they played Wooly Bully on the speakers, and my son looked at me. He's 12 years old, and he's going, "That rocks!" It's like the original version of Wooly Bully, and he's really getting into it. It's like, yeah, he's seeing, you know, what it's really all about.
Wait, is that it, Steve? We just have this impulse to change. If we've heard it too much, it's maybe as a
Yeah, but you know what?
the grass is greener.
But it evolves into something new. But then it evolves into something what it always was. I mean, if you go back as far as the Beatles, they were just the Everly Brothers, really.
Yeah.
And all mixed in with Little Richard, and you know.
Yeah.
Well, they did something to it. Let's take a listen, because we've got the Sponge Tones here, and they're still around, and they're still producing some music. So let's listen to the Sponge Tones.
I get up, I move on, I fake on, I come back around to you, and again, I come back, I remember when I caught up to what you said, and they just wouldn't leave my head. I remember what you said, that I love you.
Yeah, I Love You, P.S. The Sponge Tones still around, so the music is still happening.
Oh yeah, that's actually coming out in their new CD called Too Clever by Half. It's not out yet, so you got a sneak preview there. But they're like, out of all the bands that I'm featuring, they're the only ones that are still around in the same group, still producing new music.
Terry and Dave, what are you guys up to?
I'm still doing it. We've got my band. I probably can't say the name on the radio, but it's the OAKTeam, and OAK stands for something. But my
Public radio, go ahead and say it.
We probably won't even get it.
my band's doing great. Our last record was a live record. It was top 10 record of 2007 in Philadelphia Inquirer.
OAK, the Olympic butt-kicking team.
Exactly.
That's who
Exactly.
you are, yeah.
I have an 80s cover band called Suicide Blonde that we're playing. We play quite a bit around Raleigh and North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And that's what I'm kind of doing right now.
And now let
it's
me
lot of
ask a
fun.
question that I already asked them. I'm going to ask them on mic here.
Go ahead.
Okay, now when you're in your 20s and you're playing these bands, you're playing in the bands, you're playing in the bars, and I did that in New York, and that's fine. It's a lot of fun. But now you guys are 50 there, or 50 plus. How the
Not
heck?
me.
Why?
Certainly not me.
Oh yeah. Well, I can't believe you're still doing it. It ain't an easy life.
I'm having more fun now than I did then.
Well, I'm having a lot of fun, but I mean, I had a lot of fun back in the 80s too, but this is, it does get a little bit harder because, you know, you're up real late at night and you got to drive back from, you know, a long, 2 or 3 hour drive back home, you know, so it's not as easy as it once was when you were in the, when you just got in the bus and somebody else drove.
But you do enjoy the discounts from AARP at this point.
Right. And now you're sadly aware of the consequences. That's the worst thing of old age. So very quickly, Dave, I've got to go, but Suicide Blonde is playing tonight in Raleigh. Where?
We're playing tonight at Nappertandy's Irish Pub.
And I'll be shooting it there
downtown.
too, so.
We'll have a film crew there, so come on down.
And the OAKTeam's playing in Winston-Salem on May 2nd with Tommy Womack.
All right, that's all good. And we've got more information, too. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being on the program. North Carolina musicians Terry Anderson and Dave Adams, former bandmates from the group, the Fabulous Snobs, and obviously still going strong. Get out there and support the music. Steve Boyle is an award-winning television producer and writer. For more information about his upcoming documentary, Return to Comboland, you can visit returntocomboland.com, COMBOLAND. Just ahead, meet Wilmington musician Tom Rhodes on the State of Things. Stay tuned.
Tear you it out tonight. Now if I seem too coy, you got to give me time to finish all these puzzles, baby. Put together words here in my mind. You think
Something to ride around with? No, thanks. And we use this.
It's good for cleaning the house.
Church.
Thanks, Frank. Great. Bring the band.
Love that.
We'll have you on Friday.
Love that. That's a big deal. Is it really?
Thanks. Pleasure to meet you. Come on back.
Thank you, Steve. Very much. I do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Come back when it's done. We'll do it again.
All right, thanks.
All right.